Doing what I did a while back, which is looking at the Tate Gallery's latest exhibition, which is on Walter Sickert. I've got something to show you, which started off just as a reflection on the Tate Gallery's latest exhibition, which is on Walter Sickert, the first one that they've done in 60 years on him. And it turned out, eventually looking into, you know how when you go and research somebody, you go through a rabbit hole into like all sorts of different areas, but it left me feeling quite alarmed. But anyway, I'll see what you think. Right, can you see him now?
Yeah. Oh yes, indeed, rather good-looking man.
Yeah, he lived till 1942, which somehow I've always thought of him as a Victorian painter. You know,
82 he was then, wasn't he, when he died?
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Not bad.
It just you just have to remind it occasionally that people live across different eras, and you tend to view them from certain one. And I suppose I saw him as arising out of the Impressionists, and in a very dark and dank Victorian London. That's just the image that I have of him before I started doing this. Anyway, he was actually born in Germany, in Munich, and he had a Danish father and an English mother. He was both a painter and a printmaker, and he also liked to think of himself as a bit of a singer. So he was very attracted to things like music halls and whatever. So he became a very important figure in British art for the transition from Impressionism to Modernism, and left a big impression on Lucian Freud, interestingly. I think there is an interesting connection there. Yeah. Anyway, the exhibition that's on at the moment is Tate Britain until the 18th of September. If you want to get an available train, good luck. And this is a review I came across in my favourite magazine, as I've mentioned before, the London Review of Books, by Tom Crewe, which is called Real Busters. And I've still got no idea what the title means, but that's what he called it. And he starts off, this is Tom Crewe. Was the course of 20th century British painting set when Walter Sickert decided he didn't like standing out in the cold? And in a way, you can see what he's getting at. That the Impressionists were all about painting on plein air, out in the open air, and often in really beautiful sort of Mediterranean settings, you know, and you could just feel the sunshine, couldn't you, in them? And so being an Impressionist over here is a bit like swimming in the sea here. It's more of a kind of, you tense yourself and do it rather than enjoy it. So this is that Crewe commentates on a previous comment in the LRB. English painters responded to Impressionism's escape from the academic into the everyday, but made something tighter and darker of it. The French pleasure in picnics and river parties and weather wasn't naturalized here. No, it wasn't. So this is taken from the Tate Britain's sort of home page on the exhibition, free entry for members, if you remember. And this is his painting from, and like a lot of his paintings, as you will see, they actually seem very blurry. I don't know whether that's because that's the way they are, or they're just not very good reproductions of them. But anyway, this one is fairly typical from there, which is of Little Dot Hetherington at the Bedford Music Hall, from a private collection. Somebody asked Walter Sickert, Victor Passmore asked him in 1938, "Have you never worked from nature?" And Sickert's reply was, "Not since I was grown up." This is another from the Tate Gallery offerings, and it's perhaps, again, slightly blurry, but quite an interesting painting of a man smoking a cigar and a woman in the background. Just to give an example of the sorts of ones that they've shown in the, if you like, the guide to the exhibition. It's not one I'm going to particularly concentrate on, though. Now this one, much later work, 1914. I suppose I don't know whether it was part of his war effort to cheer Britain up. Remember, it's 1914. Of Brighton Pierrots, and this is in terms of the, when I go to an art gallery, the place I like going to most is the shop, so that I can buy postcards of the paintings that I liked. And I think Brighton Pierrots is probably one of the Sickert's most bought postcards, if you like, bought reproductions at the Tate. And you can see why. It's got interesting colours. There's lots of action in it. It even looks like it's reasonable weather. And that's sort of the Pierrots. I don't know whether it was taken on the pier. It doesn't look like the pier, but I imagine it would be, because they're on the pier. It's called the Pierrots. But I do like that one.
The central figure is very odd.
They often are with him.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to.
This one here.
His legs and his body are sort of. No,
I think he must be sitting on something, because you can see his bottom.
Yeah, it looks.
That could be it, couldn't it? But you're right. They often appear a bit like that. They're often a bit unusual. And it's hard to get the attention to detail because, as I say, they look so kind of smudgy, don't they? But I do like the colours. I think the colours are great. I'd like a suit like that. Now, it's interesting that in his piece, he really has a go at the Tate. He says, the creators of the Tate show should have been led by their subjects, who said you should show things chronologically rather than in terms of they had a load of his portraits all in one room. The first room is a pure piece of crowd-piercing twaddle, filled with self-portraits from across Sickert's career, some of them important works. They've been sundered from their natural bedfellows elsewhere. It's actually really nice to hear a critical thing of an exhibition. Usually they're quite very supportive of it, though the exhibition elsewhere in the Guardian, which I'll come on to, get a superlative review. Yeah, go on.
It's like two faces, isn't it? Really? See what I mean?
It's Lazarus breaks his fast. I don't know what that means, really.
No.
If somebody called Lazarus, obviously not raised from the dead, I don't think. But maybe he's had a fast and he's just having his breakfast. But it's an unusual one because this is one of the paintings that is analysed in great detail by people who think that Sickert is Jack the Ripper. And I'm not going to go into, honestly, this painting, I come across one site where it's reproduced about a dozen times, each with different arrows to different parts of the portrait, showing things which relate to secret messages that he's saying that he was Jack the Ripper. But I am not going there.
How odd.
But he certainly was attracted to the seamier sides of urban life, in the way in which, I suppose in France, people like Toulouse-Lautrec were as well. Now, his two big mentors were Whistler and Degas. When Sickert was a 21-year-old dropout from the Slade in 1882, he was introduced to Whistler at a party and became his dog's body and apprentice. And Sickert was always telling him to use the alla prima technique, which is wet on wet. The paint wasn't given the chance to dry between stages, but added cumulatively over a short period of time. It could work beautifully, but more often it didn't. And in fact, I think he spent ages cutting up his old attempts at this before it worked for him. But that's probably one of Whistler's most famous paintings of his mother, Anne McNeill.
That's very good.
It is a good one, isn't it? I like it. It's somehow it really makes an impression on you, and the fact that it's from the sea as well.
Very good.
I think it's very effective. Her feet are actually on a little stool as well, aren't they?
Little footstool.
So with Whistler, his influence, he said, it's about the control of low tones, the effect of artificial light, things like the picked out gilt of rails and mirror frames in the music halls, and the flames of glass chandeliers, with Manet and Degas, who are also, their influence was very different, about unobtrusive paintwork. Degas apparently advised proceeding as though painting a door, which I thought was quite interesting. But there was a very famous year in Dieppe, which is in France, Europe, where Sickert went along and met up with both Degas. They overlapped. Whistler was there, and then Degas was there, and he did a series of paintings which are perhaps more typical Impressionist style. This is one of his in Dieppe, and here's another one of the Dieppe. This is held in this. Again, it's a nice one. So I'm just moving you down here, out of the way. Dieppe Port in 1885, and I think they're quite interesting, quite powerful ones. I think not very typical of his later work. This is Degas and Sickert on holiday together in that year. I assume that it's Sickert on the right, though he looks very much a kind of dandy, doesn't he? The way he's dressed, very interesting. And this is where they stayed. I thought you'd like this one, Jackie, because it's very much a Normandy house, isn't it? It's
absolutely.
It's sensational. It really is. And I think the smaller house on the left was where which they used for painting in. But they must have been pretty well off. Though for a while, though he divorced her eventually, he was married to quite a rich woman who has helped subsidize some of his paintings. Though later on, he'd do paintings to raise money. So he'd do things which he thought people would want rather than these more grisly paintings, which you don't think of normally. It's like anybody, they try and do things. You get a bit fed up of it when you think your best ones aren't selling, and you do something that's a nice view of a river, and away you go. So he did a bit of that as well. But I think I just like looking at the painting of this one. This is this was an advert for I mean, Dieppe was obviously some place in that time. It was a very, very it attracted a lot of people to it, a lot of British people, a lot of French painters, and I thought to just show, just as a bit of a getting away from Sickert for a while, are some of the people who also painted La Mer des Auteurs de Dieppe. That's, I think he means taken from the cliffs, isn't it? Because there are cliffs around Dieppe, and he's painted it.
Lovely.
That's Delacroix in 18.
Oh, marvelous.
Sur la plage de Dieppe, Eugène Boudin, 1864, and also I like that one too. I like the dog.
Oh yeah.
Looks windy, and I like the fact it's not just lovely weather as well. Again, it just shows you how different painters see the same place. This is Claude Monet. I think it's a wonderful one, that. And finally, Paul Goga in 1885, another one. So, not finally. I think Pissarro is a really, really good painter, and I've only come across him recently. He's not one of the most famous Impressionists, but I think that's a really good painting of the fair at Dieppe, which obviously looks like quite an event. Right. He was very, very keen on the work of Charles, also called, on Charles Keene, an illustrator for Punch, who also exhibited and whatever, and he later described him as the greatest English artist of the 19th century. And what one group of painters who were both serious painters, were the ones who did a lot of the illustrations from Punch, because they had to work quickly, they had to be fairly accurate. And in this one, a tourist is trying to help. And he did a whole series about the problems that artists have, one of which was an artist posing in the foreground of his scene, hoping to be included in the painting, which obviously he couldn't be. Right. Right, this is getting on to quite an interesting time that he was involved in, which is the painting. Now, Gatti's Hungerford Palace. Gatti was I think an Italian ice cream entrepreneur. I'm too sure about that, but he set up this Palace of Varieties, which is one of the music halls. It was the second turn of Katie Lawrence, 1902 to 1903. So it was built under the arches of Charing Cross Station, but it seems that Katie Lawrence, who you can see featured there, here's another one of them, which is of the old Bedford, and again it's one of the first that was done of a music hall of the audience rather than the person actually performing. And I think it's quite interesting that the way it was done. And again, this is used as another of those which kind of indicate the emphasis he has on people's strangeness and possibly darker things than that. Though somebody, I think, comments on it. I can't. It was basically that it's thought that they were actually watching Marie Lloyd, and who'd been on the stage since she was about 16, and it's also called, as well as called the Old Bedford, it's also had other names because he did variations on this, called The Boy I Love Is Up in the Gallery, and that was the title of a song made famous by Marie Lloyd, and she performed at the Old Bedford when she was 15. So, and this is what the commentator says: perhaps we are to imagine that the young man in the front row, his head in his hand, is gazing down and fantasizing about this buxom Victorian sex symbol. I mean, it sort of, there is some credibility in that. It is a possible interpretation of it. Anyway,
I think the light's very interesting in that painting because you get the sense of gaslight and
yes, that's right. And also the glitter of the gold,
yeah.
The gold on the sides of it as well. I think that comes up. I think I really like that painting. I think it's one of his best. At one point,
right, the contrast between all the gilt and things, and then what looks like a fairly tatty building. If you look at the walls and ceilings, they've all got dirty bits on them and things.
Well, isn't that typical? I mean, I always think going to the palace, it's a bit like that.
Yeah.
Faded grandeur.
Yeah.
Never been grand, but trying to aspire to grandeur. Yeah, and it's interesting that he was really enamored of Katie Lawrence, and he did a huge number of paintings of her sketches of her between 1880 and 1903, but only one of which survives. Anyway, at one point he offered Katie Lawrence one of his paintings, and that's Katie Lawrence. Just thought it's an interesting set of photos. What's she doing with those barbells, for goodness sake? I don't know. Anyway, she's obviously a comic actress, amongst other things as well, and interestingly dressed up, which I think is a fairly common trope in music hall, of a woman dressing up as a man in it on the right. And she was offered one of his paintings, but she said she wouldn't have it, even to keep the draft out from under the scullery door. So she obviously wasn't one of his greatest admirers.
No.
Does anybody know what a claque is?
It's a group of people who heckle from the audience, isn't it?
Very good. Very good. It isn't quite that. Is that they were actually employed to applaud, to start the applause going.
Oh,
okay.
So yeah,
it has a look of Monk about it. I think it's that face at the front with the open mouth.
That's a very good point. He's often been reflected as being the only British artist who could stand comparison with people like Monk. And,
yeah,
you know, it is, and this one in particular, this is one of the comment. This is from a feminist reading of this painting. Feminist reading. The uncomfortable proximity this image takes in connection with the clock's focus on the female performer in the foreground. So in the foreground, you could see that's the female performer. Can be read as a redistribution of power. The female figure isn't a passive recipient of the male gaze, but rather she powerfully and consciously constructs her world by acknowledging the male gaze and then using it to further her career. That's one point of view. Another is a singer opens her mouth in full-throated chanson, but she's crowded by some of the most horrible faces imaginable.
Yeah.
I'll just finish this off. One bowler-hatted young man has empty black eyes, guy at the back, and a mouth hanging idiotically, bestially open. I think that must be the one on the left, I'm not sure. The scariest has ghoulish, bloodshot eyes, a nose that has collapsed into a skull-like orifice, and a slash of a grinning mouth that seems to have been cut into his flesh with a razor. different kind of view, that really, isn't it? But this is taken as one of the views that shows that he was somebody who was obsessed with death and people who thinking of committing something. So that was about Ada Lundberg at the Marylebone Music Hall, 8th. Sorry, Jackie, what were you going to say earlier?
Well, I was just going to say she doesn't look happy to me. She looks as if she's screaming in agony.
Bernard.
Yeah.
There were the claqueurs were an original group of professional sycophants who were actually paid to go into theatres in Paris to get the audience going.
This is from The Guardian, not from some weirdo fantasist website. Well, you could call it that. I don't think so.
Yes.
Graham, you're right.
And this is last week's review. Walter Sickert review: serial killer, fantasist, or self-hater. And they use as an example this particular example of it, and it's the review of the exhibition. The dead bodies of murdered, this is the Guardian, the dead bodies of murdered women are served up as butcher's meat in this survey of work by the Victorian painter, who almost certainly claimed to the police to be Jack the Ripper. So there you go. Or if not, if there was no solid evidence that even if he was not the killer, he may have believed or fantasized that he was. He even did a painting of his own flat and called it Jack the Ripper's bedroom. Apparently that was in the Walker Art Gallery review of Sickert last year.
Yeah.
Again, the centre of the exhibition is a no-holds-barred display of Sickert's nudes. Against the dark walls of the gallery, in fierce yet subtle lighting, the women are laid out. Their bodies are spread, exhibited, arranged like a patient etherized upon a table, to quote T.S. Eliot.
Yes. Yeah.
Nothing new in that, then.
No.
Yes. So this actually is taken not from the Jack the Ripper killings, but from something called the Camden Town Murder. Are any of you familiar with that? In which actually another artist called Robert Wood was tried for the murder of a prostitute, Emily Dimmock, and acquitted after a defence by a famous defence barrister Edward Marshall Hall, and so it's still unknown to this day who actually murdered her. So the Camden Town murder series that Sickert did was inspired by this murder, but here we're unsure if the woman is asleep or dead, the man sitting on the bed in despair, all passion spent, whether sexual or murderous. I don't know what you think.
Clothes on.
She's got no clothes on. Yeah, that's true.
He's still got his clothes on. That's all.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. No, that's often, I think, always in the case of his paintings on this. But then, to try and leave you on a slightly more optimistic note.
Yes, please.
This is a much later drawing of the miner, done in much later, 1935. He was still painting then, and I really like this one.
I think that's really good, that one.
It was based on a 1935 press photo of a miner's embrace with his wife after just coming up from a stay-down pit strike. The passion as he kisses his wife, that hunch and heft of the shoulders. Sickert was reported to have said, "That picture gives you the right feeling, doesn't it? You want to kiss your
She doesn't look too keen."
I was just going to say that, Sandy, that she looks like she's being pulled into it rather than into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, true enough. Point taken. I'm just giving his views. You would kiss your wife like that if you just come up from the pit. Yet the woman's arms remain by her side. Is she kissing him back? This is unclear. Then paintings with all the answers aren't good paintings. That is the one that what it's leaving you with is some sort of ambivalence about it. In recent years, critics and viewers have asked if Sickert's paintings objectify women, questioning the power dynamics between model and artist with the scenes they depicted. I don't think it's surprising that he was seen as a bit of a role model by Lucian Freud. I think that's very interesting that he's one of the artists he had the greatest impact in. Well, to ignore this would be obviously an oversight. His Viennese contemporary Sigmund Freud maintained that civilization was a thin veil over the sexual desires and obsessions that drive humanity. Sickert's painting rents that veil, not as a "look what I'm doing" shock tactic, but to present light as it really is and to free art from hypocrisy. That was a comment from the Morning Star review of the Tate Gallery, which was very, very different to the ones done by the Guardian, which was the other extreme from it. Anyway, that's the end of that. Well, hey, I only thought there were 4 of you. Where the others come from? I just did that. I started on this thinking this is just a straightforward review of a Tate Gallery retrospective, a bit like some of the others. But it leaves you feeling, when you look at it in depth, he's done an enormous number of paintings as well. I've only showed some of them. It makes you feel very conflicted about the whole thing, and it's felt the Morning Star approach was that he's been left largely as untouched, and he's subject to a wokeness. But you know what I mean? I'm not saying he has been, but that's what they're suggesting, that he hasn't been looked at because of this fear of looking at his paintings because of what they portray and how he portrays them, especially men and women, and especially with dead people. No, I think I better stop talking. Has anybody got any comments?
No, I enjoyed it very much so.
I mean, it's very close to his name, isn't it, to Sick Art? Anyway, Graham.
I'm just going to say, the Whitworth's got quite a few Sickerts, and they're very, very dark portraits. You know, they're kind of it's quite hard to fathom them really, but they're mostly sort of single portraits. But I don't know if they're on the exhibition all the time, but they did do an exhibition of his at one time, quite a few years ago now. But
I didn't know that. I'll go and look next time.
Well, I think the problem with Manchester art galleries, both of them, is that they've got 10,000 paintings in storage where they've got nowhere to exhibit those, and they have to keep trying to change them around. But, yeah, they did have. Well, the Whitworth specifically has a few.
Right. Some of his paintings are, I think, really, really powerful, but some of the others are definitely on the weird spectrum, aren't they?
Not on his own there, is he, Bernard?
Pardon?
He's not on his own there.
No.
Yeah, you only got to look at Lucy and Freud, haven't you?
Yeah. It's gracious, yeah.
Oops, look, I've just chopped off another ear. Yeah.